Hello, everyone. Welcome to our AI and legal tech topic at A2J Tech today. My name is Laura Steinbach. I'm a legal innovator at A2J Tech. Today, we have with us Adnan Siddiqui and Margaret Hu. Our other speaker, Mutale, is unfortunately encountering technical issues, so she may pop in later or may not. So I apologize for anyone waiting for her to come in. But for now, let's go ahead and introduce ourselves. Adnan, do you want to get started?
Yeah, thank you very much for the invite, Laura. My name is Adnan. My history is I'm actually on the software development and product management side. And I've been associated with LawDroid for about 6 to 7 years from their beginning when they were starting to be a chatbot to help lawyers keep track of their appointments to the various product iterations. Right now, I'm more on the advisor capacity. But specifically within software, my passion has always been looking at AI and how it can help provide force multiplier to lawyers. And within that, more specifically around increasing the access to justice for some of the community that just doesn't have the ability to afford legal help. So very excited to be here and talk within that specific domain, as well as other questions around AI and maybe some recent news you may have heard around AI developments and what it means with law. Thank you, Laura.
Hey, Margaret.
Great. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak on this very timely and important topic. And my name's Margaret Hu. I'm a professor of law at William and Mary Law School in Williamsburg, Virginia. And I teach cyber security and privacy and AI in the law. And I'm currently working on a book on AI in the law. And it will be a casebook that will encompass a broad range of topics, including just an introductory framework of how we understand AI issues within the law, and then move to public law, constitutional law, then move to private law, international law, and then finally end with corporate frameworks and ethical frameworks surrounding artificial intelligence.
That's awesome, guys. We're going to go ahead and dive into our questions on this topic. And I'm curious, how are you guys seeing legal professionals use AI in their day-to-day work?
Margaret, do you want to start?
Well, I come from 10 years in the Civil Rights Division at the U.S. Department of Justice, where I was a trial attorney and a supervising manager. And that was over a decade ago. And I really did not see that much AI integrated into the day-to-day work of attorneys. But as everybody has seen in the news recently, with the sanctions against the attorney in the Southern District of New York who was allegedly using ChatGPT to generate legal research, I think that that really brought to light on a national and international scale the way in which those in the profession are increasingly looking to AI tools to supplement the type of work that they do. And I know that there has been an explosion of technologies in recent years. And so my understanding is that there have been my understanding is 1,369 patents that have been applied for that are machine learning and legally oriented, and that over 757 million was invested by over 250 companies in recent years to develop legal tech in AI. And so this is something that is rapidly unfolding before our very eyes. We're seeing it in a range, I believe, of opportunities in legal profession for sorting through discovery documents, for filing documents, for providing generative AI for creating legal documents, wills, contracts, real estate agreements. And so I think that the possibilities are so exciting, but the potential for misuse and abuse is also ever present and really requires a lot of very careful thinking and planning to try to guard against, I think, some of the most destructive and damaging aspects of these new technologies.
Yeah, I'd build on what Margaret said, maybe a little bit more of what I've seen from a technology perspective. I feel initially the two areas that I saw adoption was discovery and document classification, as Margaret mentioned. But also where I saw, initially when AI came out, machine learning started, legal lawyers didn't quite see the use case, or there was a lot of concern about, are they not going to be doing, is AI going to miss something and then end up creating a problem where the lawyer has personal liability or professional liability. But one of the areas where there is actually quite an AI that people don't recognize, and that was, I think, one of the first ones, was actually chatbots and customer service and intakes. So LawDroid, which I've been associated with, actually targets not as much as big law, but small to medium size attorneys and their firms. And they were quite eager to use customer service chatbots, legal intake, organizing, and being able to communicate and talk in terms of, and the one area that I also saw then, besides discovery, the natural progression I saw was also contract management. I think some of the 700 plus million that Margaret mentioned, a lot of it has gone to more contract management and contract analysis, especially extracting covenants and requirements and saying, this contract's going to renew automatically, and providing some intelligence and contract compliance, etc., by being able to give them just a raw contract and then be able to extract it in a structured format that a rest of a company or a client for a legal person can use. So it helped provide some obligations, etc. Those are the two that I've seen. And then, as Margaret also mentioned, more recently, I would say in the last year or so, there's been more comfort level in the actually now using AI to generate documents. So really looking into filling the blanks, or maybe starting out with a template or finding a template that's useful based on what your legal needs are. Those are some areas where I've seen it come through. Generative AI, is fairly new, and it'd be interesting to see where it lands, but definitely a lot of opportunity there.
Thank you guys for sharing that. You guys have mentioned some tools that are helping a lot of lawyers with their legal work, but I was curious if you think any of these tools are helping access to justice right now. Adnan, you were saying yes. What
Yeah, I
makes
would
you think that
say,
way?
I think where we have done some work, with LawDroid, and it's actually some of the aids that are, we actually did something similar to Hello Divorce. We actually worked with a legal aid company, or a legal aid organization in Tennessee, to help create fill-in-the-blank websites, where we also provided both an ability to provide a chat-based interface and provide a question and answer of the flow chart. So you could answer, with basically like a TurboTax for filing. One thing I would point out to that is there was a good example of both technology, but also the legal system. So in that case, there was a very unique, this is a simple divorce. There is no minimal assets. There is no children. The court system and the Justice Department in Tennessee was able to pre-certify these filings, and we were going to accept it. So there's a lot of work actually done on the legal side of it, and technology enabled it. I think if that wasn't there, we would have struggled. There's been a lot of, as a technologist, we have a lot of passion and we can come up with tools, but I think if we don't have the ecosystem around it, we see some problems. But I think that was one example of where it helped us. More recently in Washington, I was involved in some discussions earlier about vacating records of past convictions around marijuana usage that California, Washington, others. I know there's definitely a lot of effort around that in California, where you can go online and then get a simple motion that everybody accepts and process it, and you don't have to pay, standard legal fees to do that. You can get it yourself. Those are some examples I can see where access to justice has come in. Although I would be very careful to say that some of that is not necessarily AI. I don't want to say
Mhm.
all of technology, there's a lot of computer technology that's just computer technology. It's not AI. I think there's still a lot more AI that can be used, but that is one caveat I would say is there's a little bit of AI in what I just said, but that's not all AI. Some of it is just computer technology.
Yeah. Margaret, during your research, did you encounter any tools that could help the average person in these legal issues?
Yeah, I want to start by saying that it's so critical to think about access to justice issues that tens of millions cannot afford legal services, and to try to think through how to build bridges to close that divide is really important when we think about justice and social justice and what it means to fulfill the promise of our legal system. And also, I wanted to preface this also with, I think that some of these legal issues are so critically difficult and complex that we have to first understand the limitations of automation, and when is it something that we can adopt so that it can increase access to justice, and when can we see a potential of argument that these types of tools can supplant legal services. And I think that that could be something that we really need to address head on, that legal services and being able to ensure high quality legal access will often need to have a human in the loop. And so just wanted to make sure that we start with that conversation, that I think that there are some fantastic technological developments that are happening that can increase access, but that we need to recognize that it is oftentimes not going to be sufficient to just delegate it to technological tools, that in order for us to have the full type of legal representation that I think that everyone deserves, regardless of their ability to afford it, needs to mean that we just invest what is necessary to have full access. So as far as like the types of tools that I think are pretty exciting are the types of chatbots that I think can, in a natural language processing way, really help to steer somebody in the right direction of the type of legal assistance that they need. So I know, for example, that there are developments of chatbots, for example, that can give immediate emergency references to those who are victims of domestic violence, for example, those who are in need of immediate resources on how to handle a filing of a temporary restraining order, or needing the type of referrals for legal assistance for child, protection, or those who need immediate assistance with divorce because of facing some type of violent circumstance in the domestic sphere. I think that also there have been some exciting AI that's been developed with trying to help with things as mundane as speeding tickets for those who cannot afford to pay them, or bankruptcy. So there are times when people who are in immediate emergency needs simply cannot afford maybe to go directly to legal help, or they need some type of assistance in understanding what direction to go in. So that initial gathering of potential resources to help an individual, I think, can be extraordinarily helpful and useful in closing the gaps for access to justice issues.
Margaret, you were mentioning some limitations to these AI tools. Do you want to elaborate on some of those limitations you've seen?
Yeah, I think that what's really important when we think about AI is the question of who created it and what is the data that was used to formulate the outputs, and what are the control mechanisms to improve it, what is the training data that is being fed into it, if it's a machine learning program, is there any kind of algorithmic transparency in order to sort of gauge if there's some type of adverse impact, such as disparate impact, And so I think that these are all really important for us to consider when we roll out these and deploy these technologies, that there's some type of feedback loop that allows for us to do quality testing, and that we understand upfront exactly what are going to be some of the limitations through whatever data is fed into the system. To, I think, help those who are the users and adopters of the technologies also understand what those limitations might be so that they are not misled.
Yeah, Adnan, you have amazing insight on how you guys address these limitations at LegalTech. Do you mind giving us a rundown on what you guys do?
Yeah, part of it, what we do is we're very strict about the data we use for our training. So we recognize what's good data in terms of whether it's contracts, whether it's cases or filings. We also aim to be the opposite of ChatGPT. And what I mean by that is with ChatGPT, it's been trained on everything and all that's there for the last 10 years in web. So it brings in a lot of the biases and data, and it's generic. People have tried to use it for simple domain without recognizing that, and they've gone off in the side tangents like we talked about. But we are very focused, LawDroid's very focused on feeding in specific domains, even within law. It's this, if this a domain is insurance claims, right? We only look at insurance claim data. We make sure our data is vetted. Algorithmic transparency, as what Margaret mentioned, is, to be honest, a little bit of still a black box. Sometimes we don't always understand, but what we can compensate and we get good results is, again, if we have good quality data as training, we can then make sure that even though the algorithm is a black box, it is still limited to what it sees. We're not feeding it extra information or biased information. So it does help us understand. We also do a lot of multiple testing. We won't just take the first answer. We will look at, okay, what happens if we keep repeatability? Because it's one thing for us to test it once and say it's great, but if there's a problem in the algorithm, it will take the same question and answer it differently. And we want to reduce the variance. We want to have predictability. So those are some of the techniques we use to ensure. But our primary goal is really being very selective and vetted on which domains we apply and where we even enable some of the self-service tools to use. So we're not going into, obviously we don't want to go into Reddit's legal forum for advice, right? I mean, you could definitely do that, but that's not something we go for. We would go for vetted sources, preferably internal Q&A documents or transcripts that a client already has.
Can I follow up on that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think that there is a sense that there is a magical quality to an open AI program like ChatGPT because of just the massive volume of data that it's able to integrate into its results. But that, exactly like Adnan says, that because it's not curated, I think that it assumes so many risks, especially in the legal sphere, that has to be comprehended, that it's not something that I think maybe we really understand how to add on some type of verification tool yet, because of just how open sourced it is for the data. So I really just wanted to say I appreciate what Adnan is saying as far as creating some type of technology that is opposite of open. If you're going to have legal professionals rely on something, then being able to have that very careful vetting process to make sure that the sources are trustworthy and that the information and data, to the extent that it is as reliable and objective and trustworthy as possible, is absolutely critical. I think that really it's going to be very difficult with what we're seeing with the capacities of ChatGPT to fabricate information to convince individuals that it is not reliable, especially non-lawyers. So, recently I had somebody take screenshots of ChatGPT results after it was a technology executive asking a series of legal questions. And just like we saw with the case that's in the news involving Avianca, you had in the screenshots that I was reviewing, ChatGPT making up cases and offering findings and a level of reasoning to false cases that were highly sophisticated and seemed on the surface to be very credible and believable. And so the way in which they reasoned through a holding of the case mimicked what you would expect to be what could be a credible source. And what I found also disturbing was the manner in which the way that ChatGPT generated the holding of a fake case in the DC Circuit, US Court of Appeals. They said that this is the styling of the case. They cited it. They had a year. They said it was decided in the year 2000, and then they gave the holding. But the holding itself had a certain slant, just like we were talking about with, potential disparate impact and embedding biases within the type of data sets when it's open. It appeared that the way in which this ChatGPT generated holding of a fake case was represented seemed to display certain biases. And biases that somebody who's a technology executive, like the one who sent me the screenshot, would not understand, would not comprehend, and the nuances would be absolutely lost as far as why and how it represented a certain bias. But I think because it's open data and it is representing a completely unvetted source of data for generating those results, there is no way to know in that black box system exactly why those biases were then reflected, but they were.
Yeah, this is a really cool way to help distinguish these open sources versus more controlled AI. So thank you for that. Thank you for explaining that, Adnan and Margaret. Another limitation that we've noticed with technology in general in the legal space is attorneys are adverse to adopting any type of technology. I'm curious to see if you guys have experienced that in your work at all. Like, have you found people who are more open to accepting AI in their legal work?
We have, I think we found similar to, I wouldn't, I would like to say there's probably a little bit of mythology there. I think the lawyers are probably not as reluctant to adopt technology and AI as people might say. I think it's a perception, and I work across multiple industries, and actually that's being said for not just lawyers, but you can actually claim same thing for doctors and nurses, etc. I think the reluctance on what I would say is unproven or new technology is universal across professions, and I would not say that lawyers are any more averse to it than what I would expect. I think what they're averse to is unproven technology or technology that's new, and also large promises. So I think if we have been, as I said, customer service chatbots were something people were used to seeing in other aspects of their interaction. So they were able to understand and be open to it. I think contract management, as I said, the companies that have succeeded in that space, they've built on the discovery space, and so I think as long as the promise or the return was not a grand scheme of, all your problems are going to be solved, then I think there is actually quite a bit of openness incrementally, right? So if we say you've already done this, and especially if we've provided examples from other industries where it has helped, those are where I've seen. I would say, and there's obviously a generation that is more comfortable with computers. You do see a little bit of a gap there. It's not 100%, I would say. There's definitely exceptions, but I would say, obviously, it's not obviously, but it seems to be that the younger, more recent graduates are more eager. They are more open to experiments, and they are able to overcome potential hiccups, right? They'll go through one hiccup and they'll say, okay, no worries, let's try it again, let's try it again. And they're willing to go through that. Whereas maybe regardless of what generation everybody's starting out with, certain, they might give up first on the first hiccup. So I do notice some type of those. And just again, to be very clear, I don't know, I should probably use the term how familiar they are with computers as their basis. And then that could also be what's their, before they, got to law school, right? What was their undergrad? Sometimes the STEM team very slightly seem to be more into it, but very, very slightly.
Yeah, I would say that I think part of what's really critical about being a part of the legal profession and adopting these new technologies is to think very carefully about ethical obligations of the profession and to one's client. And so it is, I think, important to actually be cautious before adopting some technologies when you have those extra layers of obligations and ethical professional commitments imposed on you by virtue of the profession that you practice and the importance of the representation to the clients. And so, I think just like Adnan said about the incremental approach, what's not only critical in addition to thinking about the ethical and professional responsibility obligations that you have in your duties to your client and duties to the court, I think you also have an obligation to understand exactly what is the nature of the technology so that you can guide it properly in the legal research and inquiry that you're doing. And I think if you don't fully understand the technology, then you're doing a disservice to yourself, to your company, and to your client, and to the court. So that unless you are able to say, this is what I see as the limitations, this is what I see as the benefits of the technology, then how are you going to be able to think critically about what it can and can't do? And so I think that, before people get too comfortable with the adoption of any type of technological tool, that sort of pre-thinking and pre-strategic management strategy needs to just come in to the thinking process, and especially if it's going to be a litigation strategy, and especially also with discovery and the ways in which some of the ways in which information is gathered and data is collected. I think just being aware of some of the risks to your client that might be inadvertent through technological adoption. So I think we've seen the ways in which, some attorneys might think that certain texts are going to remain private, and yet then suddenly in discovery, they have to hand those over. The way in which we think about, the data that's generated, is not discoverable suddenly might be classified as discoverable. So, those are just some, I think, thoughts about the technology and how it's adopted. I think that, with legal research in particular, we've seen, massive explosions of, I think, the adoption of more and more technologically sophisticated methods for legal research and discovery. And I think we're going to just continue to see that, moving forward. And a new sort of AI generated tool that I saw rolled out to the market recently was combining various drafts of briefs or motions, and then some type of generation of what it would be the strongest argument, or proposing various different ways to structure an argument for the drafter to contemplate and for the team to think about. And I thought that was quite an interesting innovation, where if you have 5 different drafts of the argument, and you might have 10 different arguments on the table, to have some type of tool that can help synthesize those arguments and to offer different ways to structure how to present the argument to the court that then is more representative across the entire team's viewpoints. And so that is an example of, I think, one of the exciting ways in which we're seeing AI being developed to try to strengthen the legal profession and the work that we do.
Yeah, building on what Jonathan mentioned, he was saying that some people suggest not using AI and reviewing the results is unethical because you're effectively overbilling if you charge for your time. So it sounds like being able to use AI as a tool for these types of processes will eventually help save the client some money at some point down the line. I've noticed that we actually have a bunch of questions in the chat, so I'm going to go ahead and turn to chat questions now. So we have our first question here. Do you see many applications of AI in the family law space, specifically in the financial and property division aspects?
I would like to hear, I am not familiar in specifically for financial and property division. I did mention earlier, and Margaret did, we do have definitely have filling out some filings and some initial motions around just the divorce itself. Financial and property can be quite challenging. I could probably think of potential ways AIs could use it, but I would have to say I have not seen anything go past some discussions at this stage. But there's definitely ways you could try to use AI in that space, and I would suspect in a few years it would come into play.
Margaret, do you have any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I thought I saw an article about an AI tool that could help to craft property agreements, and would not surprise me with a TurboTax equivalent, as Adnan was explaining, for divorces and settlements, and structuring potential talking points for whether or not a couple can agree upon scheduling for child visitation, something that could be presented to each one of the council as a result of being fed data by a couple. And so I think that there are multiple tools that are being developed and rolled out right now in the family law space, and could help to potentially streamline some of the complexities of that decision making.
Let me just jump back in though, but build on something Margaret said earlier. Just the last few minutes, one thing I do see is this is actually something that I would be concerned about, where the biases can really be a problem. Because if you look at, what is the data that they're looking at historically, because you're talking about very, what are the types of agreements that you're training on? Are those favoring one party? Are they favoring the other party? This could be quite sensitive, because if you choose only a subset, or if family law, let's say, I'm not a lawyer, obviously, but obviously if there's been changes in how those divisions, whether they're financial, property, or etc., have been historically done and now how they're done today. If you take something that maybe was okay 10 years ago and you train an AI on that, you're then explicitly training this AI to repeat those biases and those adverse impacts. So this would be one where I would personally be very concerned on whatever tool that's being developed, that they're looking into not being actually reinforcing something that the legal community might be actually trying to move away from, because they're using 3 or 4 years old approaches to how these divisions are being done. So this is one where I could see more of the concern, but I'm very optimistic. I think as long as you recognize the areas of concern, there are ways that you can address them. But I see this is very personal impact on people. So it's different. One thing to not have the right parking ticket and you still have to pay $30 for parking because your AI didn't get you out of the ticket. But this is a lot more life impactful, and we need to be careful as technologists and lawyers.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. If you have a system that's built that embeds biases within it, then if there is an over-reliance on that technological method for, some type of recommendation, I think that could be, I think, very potentially discriminatory. And I go back to, my statement about this is why, having a very strong sense of what the limitations of the technology might be upfront before it's adopted is really critical, especially if the technology is going to somehow negatively impact the quality of representation, that you're able to give to somebody, and especially something that is as consequential as the division of assets, for example, in divorce. What I would also be concerned about would be courts eventually adopting certain type of automated systems where they require feeding in data, by each one of the parties, and then allowing for some type of system to help with the court in making those determinations when it really should be a human in the loop, and a more careful examination of the type of evidence necessary to come to some type of fair and equitable decision. But we see more and more automation in the courts themselves, and judges adopting tools to assist them in these very complex, data-rich and environments where the data can be overwhelming. So I think that's something for attorneys to be cautious of.
Okay, great. Thank you, Wanda, for your question. Moving on, we have another question from Jonathan. Can you talk about how these legal LLMs, or large language models, I believe, will compete and play out if LawDroid, Thomson Reuters, and others all have legally trained and high quality large language models? What will that future look like?
Yeah, I do see there's going to be multiple providers. I think there will be niches. Thomson Reuters obviously will look for covering abroad. They'll go address the big law. What LawDroid does and where we focus on is more niche, more specific domains, specific size. I do believe it's not necessarily a competition where only one is left. I think it's more of a competition where some of the concerns around ethics, quality, what data are what differentiates, and that's how the competition will go. But I do see, going back to my earlier comment, instead of a generic open chat GPT, we'll have much more narrower focused LLMs, and as a practitioner, as a lawyer, you can decide which one suits you in terms of your domain and your use case. So I do see this being multiple providers with different targets.
Margaret, feel free to, if you have a comment on that as well, feel free to add something too.
Yeah, I wonder whether or not, because of what we're seeing with, the case that we were describing, where an attorney is going to ChatGPT and looking for legal research and asking for the system to generate legal research, including, the case stylings and the holdings, it being apparently false, but whether there will be increasing pressure on companies to generate something that has that ease of facility and that type of delivery of product that is high quality. And I think that will be the future challenge of, the companies that are trying to serve the larger, law firms. I think that there is such pressure on time. And if attorneys believe that is, something that should be capable, how do you create that in a way that's responsible?
Right. Thank you, Jonathan, for your question. Let's see here. Sean has a question. He says, repeatability. On Azure OpenAI, they have temperature that allows you to control the wildness. 0 is none, 1 is high. Are you suggesting that temperatures should always lean towards 0? How creative can we trust the AI to be?
That's a complicated answer here. Initially, I would say I'm not suggesting that it should be zero. And what I would like to elaborate, going back to my comment, is we try to make sure it's repeatable for the same, even if you have it not zero. If you do zero, then you're going to get the same answer. And again, whatever the bias is, you're just going to keep getting it. In our case, when we're looking at repeatability, we'll set the temperature at 0.1, 0.05, and then we'll look for the variance to still be within a certain expectation, because let's say you have a niche LLM or a niche trained model. If it's truly designed better than ChatGPT, then for 0.1, it should have less wildness than, say, ChatGPT. So that's really what we're trying to do, is we're trying to make sure that when you do allow it to be creative to a certain parameter, it is being creative still with boundaries. It diverges quite fast with ChatGPT versus these custom models that we look at.
Right, cool. It looks like Jonathan has a similar question. Technologically, can these legally trained and high quality LLMs be expected not to have hallucinations, or are they a permanent part of the landscape? So my understanding, well, before you dive in, Adnan, can you please explain what a hallucination is for those who may not know?
Yeah, so hallucination is exactly what we've been talking about, where you imagine something that is not there. And in this case, the hallucination could be a case or a finding that was not there, a party that was not involved, or a legal precedent that's not there, but it sounds good. And, it's a little bit more of a realistic, it's more imagination than hallucination, because you can get tricked into believing it's right the way it's presented, because it sounds like it should be true. And especially if you're not a lawyer, I look at some hallucination like, looks great. But I think they are part of it. It is actually an inherent problem with useful LLMs that they have hallucinations. You could do an LLM that doesn't have hallucination, but the usability is quite limited. It kind of goes back to my comment about temperature being zero. So they are part of the LLM technology. There are ways that you can limit those, and there are ways that you can then do checks of what an LLM generates against a different AI that then validates. And it can actually extract, for example, a simple way we would manage this is every time the case is mentioned, we would actually go back and then use a different search tool to say, is that case actually exist? And if it doesn't, then you can highlight it and say this answer came up, but this case that was cited does not come up in whatever legal archive or legal records you're using. So in that case, LLMs themselves have problems, but there are safeguards using other technologies that can limit those or minimize those.
Thank you so much,
But
Adnan.
sorry, just one last comment though, is you would have
Yeah.
to know where the hallucinations are though, right? So the example I gave is a case which is easy to test, but you do need some expertise and some expert lawyers to say, okay, this is one, but here's some other potential areas that hallucinations are coming from, and then that identifying those may not be as easy.
Thank you so much, Jonathan and Sean, for those questions. I believe this next question is for you, Adnan, as well. So this question comes from Rosa. Are you hosting AI pilot programs with legal professionals, attorneys, paralegals, legal secretaries?
Yeah, I mean, LawDroid obviously does that, and I'm sure A2J Tech has some, and we can follow up. But yeah, and there's other organizations. We're not the only, but definitely if you're interested in this, I would encourage you, whether it's us or anybody else, definitely, if you're interested, go do a pilot. As long as you know what the limitations are, that's the best way to understand and make a decision and help help us increase the access to justice in general, and then just AI adoption. Give us feedback too, because pilots helps us understand what works and what doesn't work. So on behalf of everybody in the industry, yeah, go for it. Yeah, we definitely, all the people that are in that space have pilots.
We plan on sharing the speakers' links, so links to either their webpage or where you can find them. So Rosa, if you want to reach out to either Adnan or Margaret, feel free to. We'll share that shortly in the chat. So we have another question from David. How does the use of AI technology align with the ethical obligations of lawyers, such as maintaining client confidentiality and upholding professional responsibility?
Well,
That's a rough one.
yeah, I'm going to jump in and say that, soon after ChatGPT was rolled out, there were multiple companies across the United States that issued policies internally to their employees stating that they should not share any type of confidential information that could compromise, trade secrets or intellectual property or any kind of PII, personally identifiable information about their users or their clients into the system because of the ways in which they were concerned that the open AI space would then lead to serious compromises, not only economic consequences to the company, but data privacy issues and cybersecurity issues, data protection breaches, and asking their employees not to use it for coding, not to copy and paste code from their companies into ChatGPT. I mean, I just think that when you're thinking about ethical obligations and open AI, it's really difficult to stress enough the way in which the the ways in which you could compromise your professional ethics in revealing very sensitive information into a system that is not secure and could have serious consequences once it's discovered that you were the source, or anyone, an attorney, was the source of the compromise.
I have a follow-up question to that, Margaret. You were talking about how people are using it to generate code and potentially input code to, I guess, make it more efficient. A lot of people are using it for exactly that purpose. So I'm just curious of what you've seen in your research. What are those types of implications for just developers in general?
Yeah, I think that, if you're at a company that is highly protective of their intellectual property and, they see that this could lead to cybersecurity breaches, which is what some companies are stating. And so not all companies have the luxury of some of the biggest of the tech companies where they have internal testing systems where they've basically tested for what they consider to be cybersecurity vulnerabilities by trying to use something like ChatGPT for coding purposes. And their results, which they have not published, and so we don't know exactly what was the testing used. We don't know, exactly why they're stating that it is, something that deeply concerns them as far as the testing results. But they have said that they have seen the cybersecurity concerns stem from the type of models that they've structured. And so without further information, because they don't want to publicize it, they guard, very carefully the ways in which they're trying to safeguard their systems. But we do know that, they've stated that it can concern, in very, very significant ways, the cybersecurity of their companies.
Thank you, Margaret. Adnan, did you want to add anything?
No, I'm 110% support Margaret's answer here.
Awesome. Thank you, David, for your question. We have a question from Eli. What might be the most practical use of AI for contract formation and or negotiation in business settings? I think we already touched on that with just normal contract formation, contract drafting, but Adnan or Margaret, did you want to add to anything?
No, I think if you feed, one example we've seen for larger organizations, we haven't been involved in it, but one of the use cases is you can take a history of your past contracts and you can look at what have been your generally accepted terms. And then you can ask a generative AI type tool to say, can you draft a contract that's similar to these? Or where a product I would imagine is going to come on the market if it's not already there is where you can take a past contract and say, take this contract and then update the company name to this and the product name to this and the price to that, right? And then we'll just generate one, or you could say update the jurisdiction. I think those kind of tools can be used for generating, instead of drafting them. And then of course I talked earlier about then being able to, if you're on the receiving end of or compliance end of the contract, you can extract obligations in a structured format of, when is it going to renew, who needs to be notified if there's a change, etc.
All right. Thank you, Eli, for your question. So we have a question from Anonymous. What role can AI play in enhancing the capabilities of document automation tools in the legal profession?
Maybe hear from Margaret first. I feel like I'm jumping in all the time. So.
Oh no, that's great, Adnan. I think that question builds upon the last one. And, I think that there's definitely ways to feed, especially if you trust, the data that's being fed in previously, so that what is being generated for, recommendations for improvement or to change the data points, for example, based on jurisdictional restrictions, you know what I mean? Like, so long as there's a strong sense of verifiable reliability, then I do think that, the ways in which the systems can absorb so many different templates and so many different variations, and then can even possibly contemplate, strategic advantages of moving towards, what type of term or one type of textual adoption versus another.
All right, Adnan, did you want to add anything?
No, thank you.
All right, thank you, Anonymous. Also, if anyone has a question that they want to ask, but they don't want their name displayed, you can always check box the anonymous option, just in case anyone is hesitating about sharing questions that way. So we have another question from Dane. Can I train my own private AI and keep it separate from the rest?
Definitely. You can, that's something that's becoming more and more accessible. Actually, as a technologist, I'm actually quite personally excited. I think if we look at ChatGPT, which came out, I want to say if January or February is what I remember. It seems like a long time ago, but I know it's fairly recent. But there's been a lot of work, incredible amount of work from really smart people on making it easier to then take what they've done and build your own AI. There is a couple of things that one needs to keep in mind. One is it does, obviously, OpenAI was not something, ChatGPT took millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, and expertise to get there. So there is a barrier of cost in terms of computing cost and expertise, but that's dropping quite dramatically. So if you have, I still think to get a decent AI for ChatGPT, like you're still talking significant amount of money. But then, if you're looking at a contract generation tool or something that just extracts obligations and you just really want it on your private AI, those tools are becoming a lot more accessible. And whether if you have a background in programming, you can use it yourself, or if not, you can even hire a developer. And definitely there's a big debate. There's that closed systems like OpenAI where you have to pay and use their systems. People are not always into it, so they're trying to break through and give tools to everybody so they can develop their own AI and keep it separate. So yes, you can definitely do that.
All right, thank you, Dane, for your question. And lastly, we have a question from Rena. What should we be following, subscribing to, keep on top of these very fast changing topics in relation to A2J and AI. Thank you.
You should be following Margaret, is what they should be doing.
Margaret, where can we find you?
Well, as you know, Laura, I don't participate in social media for data privacy and cyber surveillance reasons, so it is actually very hard to follow me. But, you know, I would say that, especially from the obligation of a lawyer and in the legal profession, what we haven't talked a lot about, and I think we need to talk about more, is data privacy and data protection. I think that serves both cybersecurity reasons and trying to, exactly what Anand said, you know, create AI systems that are going to be more curated, more reliable, more dependable, and adhere to, you know, the highest standards of, I think, the type of professional responsibility and ethics that one is owes one's clients. You know, is the direction that people should be going into. So, you know, in addition to, you know, just VPN and, you know, now there's technologies that are, you know, developed for and encryption and, you know, the type of technology now to allow for making private your web activities. You know, I think just adoption of those types of technologies could be extremely useful.
Yeah. I was about to type this in chat, but there's actually somebody who's spent years doing this, and they have a very good. It's this website called artificiallawyer.com. I would suggest that's a starting point if you want to really look into what's happening. The person who runs this is quite knowledgeable in this space, and they do a lot of looking at the space. And then I think once you start from there, you can fit the specific need you have or the topic you're interested in. They can give you who else to follow and websites and blogs and companies. But Artificial Lawyer, I think, would be a good one to start if you're not really, if you're looking for what websites to check.
All right, thank you, Rena, for your question. Oh, I was also going to say, if you're interested in access to justice topics, we have a Twitter. Lacey just linked it down below. So if you would like to follow on that as well, please feel free to do so. Lastly, Jonathan wanted to contribute a private GPT out there, and he linked it down below. So let me paste that in chat too, just in case people can't see that, in case anyone else is curious. All right. Thank you, Adnan. Thank you, Margaret, so much for your insight on this topic. We've been linking out to Adnan's LinkedIn and also Margaret's faculty page. So feel free to reach out to them. Thank you guys so much for attending this amazing event. It was very insightful, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting, Laura.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Bye.